Hi everyone, this is Breach from Chthonia podcast, and this is it's become my weekly live stream. It's evolved into that eventually. I don't think initially that this was ever the plan to do things this way, but it's kind of worked out this way. So if you're regularly watching this, then welcome. Or even if you're not, thank you for joining me today. I've been trying to get the word out about these a little bit early, rather than just trying to spring them on people at random times. Just so that way, if people who actually do want to see this live can come in and participate. And those who don't, this is available, the recording's always available afterwards. Sometimes I notice that it gets cut off in post, so you have to hit it an extra time and open it in Reels, and then it will show you the whole thing. But what I'm also doing now, this is a new thing, is I'm actually downloading these from my archive, and I am putting them up on YouTube. So, and it seems weird because then the next question is usually, well, why don't you just do live streams on YouTube? But the reason I have not done that as of yet, I may do that in the future, but there's a few more steps involved in doing a YouTube live stream, and those also tend to be interrupted by commercials. Now, when I do post these, I usually have a commercial at the beginning and the end, but I don't want something that's going to have commercial interruptions or where I have to keep shutting commercial interruptions off in the middle. So I kind of prefer to do it this way for now. Eventually, if there's a situation where I feel like there's something more interactive, like a Q&A or something like that, I might. Right now that's something I would do for Patreon, but I haven't thought about moving it over to YouTube yet. In that sense, doing sort of a live, where people jump in and they donate and they do different things. But that's something I think I'd rather save for if I was having, say, a live conversation or something with somebody. So yeah, so that's the one new thing that I did rather spontaneously, and some of my followers on YouTube were like, "Oh, it's like Christmas. We've got four new Chthonia things in one day." But that's because I had put them all together, and I wanted to create a playlist for them and everything. So these live streams now, if you're just joining, are going to be also on YouTube. They're going to be this exact live stream I'm downloading and putting over there. The new podcast out today with the little title, What's War Got to Do With It? And has a lot to do with war, love goddesses and how they also seem to be connected with war, but also the warlike nature of love. There's a term, Rati Yuddha, in Hinduism, which literally translates to love battle, and it has to do with Rati, who is the goddess of carnal desire. Now, Rati herself is not really a warrior, although she is portrayed with a sword in at least certain imagery. So, so I think that's an interesting podcast. That one's a little longer than usual, but you should check that out. Also on YouTube. If you're not subscribed to my YouTube channel, it is at same as here, Chthonia Podcast, youtube.com/@Chthonia Podcast. Definitely subscribe if you like this kind of content. A lot of people do download the podcast from Spreaker, or they get it through their app, whatever, they use iTunes, Google Play, whatever equivalent that they use to get podcasts. I guess Apple has separated them all out now. But some people just prefer to see the video thing, which is usually I just put images together. It's not a video of me doing it live like I am now, if you haven't seen them. I just put images together that are relevant, or as close to relevant as I can get, and trying to stick to images that are not as much as humanly possible to non-copyrighted images. So it's a bit of a thing to put the videos together, but yeah. So so there's that. On the update front, before I get into my topic for today, I think it's just been an incredibly busy time with all kinds of stuff going on. I've mentioned family stuff, and then now I have another relative who's in the hospital in intensive care. I haven't been able to. I'm not going to be going to see him or anything, but it was my mother's brother, actually, and so there's been a whole lot of activity around that kind of stuff this week. Apparently he is doing better, but he is really, really quite sick. And actually, the subject of hospitals is sort of what got me into the topic for this week's live stream, so I will talk about that in a moment. The other weird thing that just happened, it literally just happened 10 minutes ago, maybe a half an hour ago. So I'm doing this Mondays when I do my washing. So I'm downstairs in my basement. I have a root cellar under this house. This is a northeast U.S. house that has a root cellar. This house is pretty old. It's old by American standards. It's about my deed says 1850. So there's a stone root cellar under there, and that's where my washer and dryer are. And I went down and I opened the doors, and hanging in the doorway was the shed of a snake skin. Okay. And so it's the molted, shed. And I've seen this before. I've seen them in my front garden occasionally. I do know that there are garter snakes that live around the house and under the house. They live under everybody's house. I remember one of my neighbors getting really freaked out. She's like, "There's snakes under the house." I'm like, "Well, yeah, where we live. The river's actually not that far away. Yeah, we have snakes, but I don't usually see them. I did have a fight with one, I think, last summer because it decided it wanted to kind of curl up around the edges of my door. I have the root cellar doors that open. They're these metal doors. And it decided to kind of wedge itself. And the thing is, if I closed the door, I would have cut the thing in half. And so I was like, "Yo, like, move," prodding it. And it was just looking at me like, it was hissing at me like, "I don't want to move." I'm like, "Do you want to die or do you just want to move? Like, make up your mind." So the thing eventually moved and kind of went into a hole somewhere. So I was like, okay. But apparently, the only thing that was alarming to me about finding the snakeskin where I found it, because it had like bits of insulation and stuff, I said, I hope they're not living in the insulation in my house, because that would be interesting to go downstairs and have, snake fall on your head. Never had that before. Hopefully that's not the case. Hopefully it just was it blew in and was inconveniently located there or something. But, we do have mice, and it would not surprise me. I don't know if garter snakes eat mice or not. I know other types of snakes do, but in any case, that's possible. That's why they're hanging around, because there's a lot of mice that come around. But anyway, it's country living, and I'm used to it. But that was a new one. That was just kind of weird. I said, maybe that's an omen of something, but I don't know what at this point. Okay, so anyway, that's sort of the general update on what's going on in life right now. And I do have a very busy week ahead. So I'm trying to keep up. Oh, those who follow Liminal Tarot, I'm very behind on readings. I think I woke up this morning. I'm like, wow, there's 6 readings I haven't done. So I did 2 this morning, and I have a third one. And so then I've just got a couple more. They're not going to come out sometime between today and tomorrow, because I just kind of gave up. I had a really rotten headache yesterday. And when I get those headaches, I'm... that one was probably on pain scale. It was probably 6 out of 10, but so it was enough that I was able to do a few things. I did manage to get some things done yesterday, but a lot of the day, like I could not sit down and focus on doing a reading or anything like that. So that it's just going to have to. So unfortunately, I feel like that's the one channel that ends up sliding a lot of the time. And it's the one I actually need to not have like that, because I do have people trying to bring client work in and stuff. So. Anyway, one of these days I will catch up with my life. So, all right. So moving on from that, let's talk about what the topic was today. As I mentioned to you initially, the idea of hospitals is what brought me to this topic. But even before I get into that, let's talk about there's something that's going on right now. And those of you who are interested in astrology, and by the way, I'm also well aware that there's a lot of people on this channel who either don't care about astrology or don't believe in it or whatever. So either way, I feel like this is a good framing for what I want to talk about, whether you literally believe in this idea or not. And that is the idea of Pluto and Aquarius. Okay. Because we have had the planet Pluto, or, well, we can argue about whether Pluto's a planet, right? But anyway, Pluto astrologically tends to be associated with the underworld. Okay, tends to be associated with what's in shadow, what's unconscious. Okay, and it has been since 2008. It went into Capricorn. Okay, that was the time we had that first big financial crisis. And it was, right at the beginning of, I think, Obama's first term here in the USA as president. And it's lasted until, it really, we're not 100% out of Pluto and Capricorn. Like, we're in Aquarius now. There's going to be a retrograde, I think, around September. But it's not going to be for very long, and it's going to go back in Aquarius. And it's going to stay there for 40 years. Okay. Now, if you believe in astrology, then you're definitely going to look at the way that the sign relates to the planetary influence. And in this case, there is Pluto. So Capricorn energy has a lot to do with it's Saturn ruled. It's very plotting. It's this idea of persistent hard work, right? We see that with Capricorn energy. Like that's the upshot of Capricorn. I mean, the downshot indicates, that we can be unhealthily attached to things. It's kind of like the devil energy in the tarot. It's this, there can be like a toxicity where we get too attached to things or to people or situations. But Pluto, when they talk about Pluto in this kind of a scale, Pluto has, because it's so far away, at least within astrology, it tends to be viewed as having more of a global impact. It does have an individual impact, yes, but the global impact is more the thing, the collective impact, because it's not quite so close to us. So its impact is going to be broader, okay? And Pluto in Capricorn, when Pluto shows up in a sign, what happens is that whatever needs to be exposed, whatever secret, whatever the underbelly is, whatever the challenge or the difficulty is in a society, is usually exposed by Pluto being in that sign. Now, with Capricorn, this has a lot to do with the sort of corporate capitalist mentality. The idea that all of us have to go to work and work 80 hours a week, and and that's what it means for you to be a good productive citizen. You have to go sit in rush hour traffic every day and do this and do that, and and then of course there's a lot that's exposed about corporate greed and the way in which this sort of privileging of people with a lot of money over people who don't, and that's still a thing that goes on, but certainly there's been a whole lot that's been exposed as a result. That seems to be, well, again, if you believe in astrology. If you don't, then the bottom line is that Pluto, it's still a framing for the idea that this the supposed good corporate industrious kind of way of life that people have, we're seeing all the ugly sides of it exposed. And probably this culminated in the COVID shutdowns, because with COVID, a lot of people were out of work for months, even over a year. I think with my job at that time, I had COVID hit in March of 2020, and I think I was asked to go back to the office in June of 2021. So it was, sorry, we had a loss of connection there. I hope this does not happen throughout this whole live stream, because I did reset my internet too, just to make sure everything was going to be okay. So anyway, sorry about that. So it has to do with, what people discovered during the COVID lockdown. Now, COVID, of course, was horrible. Everything about it was horrible in terms of it as a disease. But what we discovered from being at home all of that time, is that, hey, you know what? We don't need to go to an office. You don't need to have, you don't need to be sitting, at a grind working for somebody, trying to work your way up through some corporation in order to make money. There's a benefit to being at home and to being able to have, work and be productive. It's not that you're not being productive, but that you can do it in your own time and in your own space. There's a lot of people who said, oh yeah, that means I could get up, I could go for a walk or a jog in the morning, and then I could come home and have breakfast. And they could be with people who had families, who never saw their kids. It's like, oh, look, now I have a family. Holy crap, there was a whole lot of change around that. And it kind of made people reconsider what the problem is with that, I'm going to be the good, ambitious, go-getter who's going to work 80 hours a week or whatever, and try, or even if you're not working that much, it's just still the idea that you are, that to be successful, that's what success is defined as, and then it's this sort of ambitious climbing that we have, and people are finally kind of going, wait a minute, no, maybe I want to do this differently. Maybe I want to earn my money differently. You have people who come on Instagram, I don't consider myself, I'm certainly not an influencer, because I'm not even a micro influencer. I'm very, very small scale, but there are people who make a living that way, and then there's people who kind of go, but they're not doing anything. But they are. But the point being is that people are finding different ways to make money. They don't just have to be like, okay, you graduated, now you've got to get this nice corporate job, and that's going to be the thing. So that happens there. Now with Pluto moving into Aquarius, okay, the thing that we're looking at here, Aquarian energy is expansive, okay? It's about thought. It's about thinking ahead, about future thinking. So what we're looking at here is specifically technology, okay? There's other aspects to Aquarius, okay? Aquarius is very social. It's associated with the 11th house of astrology, which has to do with friendships. It has to do with networks. It can have to do with your goals and things like that. But it also has to do with technology and forward thinking in that sense. I mean, Mercury has a little bit to do with technology, but Pluto would have to do with the way in which we are shaping our future, like the ideas that we have to shape our future. Okay, so using that as a framing and understanding that Pluto is going to be exposing what's problematic about that. Okay, it's going to be saying, hey, is the way you're doing it, here's the problems with the way you're doing it. It doesn't always mean that we have to abandon the way we're doing something, but it's showing us where the difficulties are. So, okay, and this was something, and it's funny, when I thought about how I wanted to put this particular live stream discussion together, I had talked to, I had the idea in the morning. People who know me know that I get up in the morning and it's like I have my coffee and I start writing all kinds of stuff down. I write dreams down from the night before, but I also write down, I'll spend a lot of time thinking about, like, ideas will just start running through my head, and then by midday and late day I'm a waste. I'm lucky I have this much energy right now, but I do in fact enjoy doing these live streams. So I'm very energetic, but probably after this, I'll do my errands and I'll just, I won't be working on too much new stuff. But my early morning thing is that I was thinking about this because I think I was thinking about not only what's happened to my uncle recently, but also about what had happened. I've told the story, and I'm not going to repeat it here, about my mother on New Year's Eve being sent home from emergency after 11 hours, being told she was fine, and she had a broken pelvis and a broken hip. I mean, she had hairline fractures in both. And she is getting around, but she is, as expected, doing far more than she's supposed to be given that. And then she says, I don't understand why I'm in so much pain. And I'm like, that's what I said to her. I said, I don't know, maybe you're doing laundry and doing vacuuming and all this crap you're not supposed to be doing, and that's why I go to your house every week to do this stuff, and this is what you're doing, but hey, I can't imagine why you're in pain. Can't imagine. I said, I don't know. So, in any case, but she had, they basically did that, and I'd had a few other conversations with people. Some of them were clients, some are friends. Not going to, again, not naming names or situations, but hearing of actually quite a lot of, I was blaming Marstown Hospital, and and yeah, they do deserve the blame for that. But at the same time, I was hearing things about not only that hospital, but other hospitals. And it wasn't necessarily in the context of that episode that my mother had. Excuse me. It's very dry in here. I had somebody who had told me that they were terrified of Marstown Hospital. They had some kind of a surgery, and again, I don't want to get into anybody's personal health problems, but let's just say that they had something where they weren't able to move their neck. Okay, they had a surgery where their neck was being kept absolutely stabilized, and nurse came in, I think, to their room once in a 24-hour period. They hadn't eaten, and they were just given like peanut butter crackers or something. And then they were told they couldn't reach the nurse's button because they couldn't move, so they couldn't call for anything. And then when the nurse did come in, the next morning the person was like, "Well, I haven't had breakfast," and they're like, "Well, you have to call. At Marstown, you have to call and order your breakfast." And she's like, the person's like, I can't reach the phone. And so they went and they just stuck the phone next to her, like, "You have to order your own breakfast," and they walk out. They didn't have this person's medications that they needed. Claimed that the hospital didn't have them. Try to imagine that. I heard about other situations of people who had like hysterectomy, and again, this is not somebody I know. This is kind of a third answer, but there was somebody who had and was denied pain medication afterwards in the hospital. Like, no, you can't have pain medication for that. Because having your uterus removed doesn't, there's no pain involved in that apparently. And then just other horror stories, and I was hearing it about some others, and in fact, it was my friend who had called me last night who had reminded me when she called. I was like, "Oh, thank you for reminding me what my topic was today." That was the initial thing about them being in the. I think she had somebody in the hospital as well, but the way in which, unless you are in intensive care, I think is basically what the bottom line was, or in the ICU units, you're not going to get care. There's no care. ICU is the only place where you will be taken care of well in any of these hospitals. So if you're not in critical, like near-death situation where they have to put you in that unit, as soon as you step down from it, you can assume you're not going to have the care. Now, okay, what does this have to do with the topic? Well, in the discussion of this, one of the things that came up was people who actually are nurses or who actually participate in nursing. Like they are, I'd heard from somebody who secondhand, but somebody who was a nurse who had said that they would not ever work at this one hospital because everything is tech driven. Now, we think of technology in a hospital as a good thing, right? We say, oh no, but you have all the best tools and all the best technology, and for surgeries and stuff, sure, yeah, that's great. You have all this technology, but then you have nurses who are assigned to all of these patients. Like usually they understaff on nursing, okay, just to begin with. That's not a new problem. But then the nurses, the way that they manage everything is technologically. Like everything is done. They basically are spending all their time at the nursing station on computers, just dealing with everything from an administrative standpoint. And in short, there's no actual nursing that goes on. Okay, there's no nursing. They're not there to go visit the patient. That's secondary. They have to worry about all the tech stuff and all the admin and all the stuff that they have to worry about in front of them. That's more important. And what I have found, at least in terms of what I'm hearing, is that hospitals that are, I'm sure they have the technologies to do things, but are not as high tech, tend to be better on care. I had experienced that over the years. I have not been in the hospital, but when I've had other loved ones in the hospital, I have found, like the hospital in the county where I live in now, Hunterdon Medical, and maybe somebody will pop in and say they have an issue with them as well. But I don't know. But I saw that they were like exemplary in their care. They didn't have as much tech as Marsh County, but they did have. They were exemplary in terms of how they took care of their patients. In general. Yeah, I remember. Years ago, somebody being in the hospital and running into the nurse in the grocery store, and that person going, "Oh, how are they doing?" It was like, so it was much more personal. There was definitely, a lot more care there, and a lot more accommodations for the families and stuff like that. Here, everybody's just running around with machines. Everybody's in the way, and the patients are just a nuisance. And that's kind of the way people feel when they're in there. But even with all of this technology, they're not keeping track of what meds people are supposed to be on, and nobody will make a phone call either. That was the thing. It was like, okay, well, if this person's supposed to have a medication and they don't have it in their big, chart or whatever, well, then maybe you need to call the doctor and find out if this person's supposed to have that medication. But no, we don't have time to call the doctor. You're just not getting your medication, even if it's one that will threaten your life to not have it. So yeah, that's that kind of stuff is a little bit scary. Because the increase in technology, is also an increase in carelessness, and an increase in a decrease in care. Okay, a decrease in the human factor. This is what I call the human factor, like thinking about the fact that you're dealing with people. Now, I have gone back and I have said, I've talked about we talk about cultural mythologies. Okay, and I'm not just talking about ancient gods and things like that. Cultural mythologies are center around whatever the zeitgeist is of a particular time. So the one that we have sort of inherited is kind of like a 18th, 19th century mentality that came out of the Industrial Revolution. Okay, so there's this, once we started having machines to do things, okay, we're getting into more technology. The first time everything did not have to be done by hand, and you actually had machines. I'm not even talking about like 1950s appliances. I've talked about that before too. We're even just talking about the first mills that did like weaving and stuff like that. That are actually the places that started things like unionization, because you have people working obscene hours for like 35 cents a week and no safety precautions, so people get killed by machinery and stuff. But we developed over that 19th and 20th century way of thinking, and especially as we have this increase in very rationalistic thinking about things, the way in which the culture, the other aspects of the culture. Like I think I had mentioned when we talked about history that the old idea about history was l'histoire, which is about story. That's the French word for story. History originally was a term that meant something somebody told me, something you're repeating from somebody else who you think is credible. Okay, that was the original, the Greek definition of the word story. Otherwise, if you were telling the story of a people or a generation, something that was a little bit more sacred, that fell under mythos, that which was myth. That's what's spoken out loud. So we have this modern idea of histoire as being something that is entirely fact-based, where it's just the facts. Journalism should just be about the facts. We should present both sides of the facts. All this kind of thinking that's supposed to be objective, right? We want to take a distance from it, and we just want to look at the facts. And that's the way we think history should be presented. Oh, we just need to see the facts of history. We want to see what date this battle was fought, and this, and this, and this. And and yes, there are things, other types of history that do bring context. There's oral histories of people who were there. There's archaeological history that deals with artifacts. There's all kinds of history, right? But when we're dealing with things, but when history was originally written, it was more written with. It wasn't necessarily written to be true in a literal sense. Like a lot of myth, there's a lot of a fine line between myth, scripture, and history. Something like a book like the Bible, for instance, does have some history in it, but it's a historical text in the old sense, not in the modern sense, because it's telling you a story with respect to the beliefs of the people. So the Old Testament, you are seeing the Judaic people. The Israelite people basically talking about their experience in the context of their relationship to their God, right? So that's what that's about. And I think I've mentioned the Arthurian legends. I mean, yeah, Arthur probably is a real king, but all the events around him, with the fairy folk and the magic and all of this stuff, I mean, from our scientific, factual way of thinking, that's irrelevant. That makes it fiction. We would say, oh, well, that's the fictional part. But it's part of the zeitgeist. We separate that out now. We separate. I talked about that last week, separating fact from fiction, right? And yeah, I mean, in a certain sense, we need to be aware of the reality around us. It's not that's not appropriate in certain contexts. But when we talk about the history of something, we often take it out of context. And when we're dealing with technology, that seems to be the thing as kind of as well. But in particular, though, we do have myths around technology, is where I'm going with this. So the industrial age brings us a mythology that comes in later, especially as we get into having computers and the first computers and things like that, of the human brain and human consciousness as a kind of computer, and therefore the human being as a kind of machine. So when we were talking about this whole corporatizing of thing and the way in which corporate energy or the corporate mentality, okay? If you think about somebody who's going to ambitiously be working 80 hours a week, taking their work home with them, doing stuff like being on call 24/7, that there's an assumption there of you as a machine. The idea that you're going to keep doing things because it's almost like, somebody's wound you up or somebody pressed your button and you can just go, right? And that if you're not like that somehow you're a dysfunctional machine, the people who are they consider to be lazy, or people who it's like, well, it could just be that you're people who don't have as much energy, who are not able to, not able to do as much, for whatever reason. Everybody has different energy levels. Not everybody is capable of working, 14 hours a day. I mean, I did it for years. Like I said, I would get up at like 3:34 in the morning. I'd get dressed. I had to be on the road to either my job at one of the universities where I worked. I usually had to be in by 7 a.m. One of them, I think I had to be in by 8. And I'd get in. I might go in. If it was my regular job, I was there till 3, and then usually I had places to go in the evening. When I was doing my doctorate on top of it, it was like, okay, I'm teaching in the morning, I'm working my regular job in the afternoon, and I'm spending 3 hours at night in another university taking my degree. And you just kind of go and go and go and go and go. And when you're younger, you might have the energy to do that. As you start to get older, that doesn't become viable anymore. But we still have this expectation that we're like machines, that we're just going to go and go and go and go. And that is a mythology that comes out of the Industrial Revolution, that we are, in fact, machines. So, yeah, so certainly when I talked about that Capricornian type energy, looking at the corporatization, the idea that you have to work hard. Oh, they'll work harder, not work smarter, not harder. That's what it is. And the idea that you can the more that you can do, the more responsibility you're going to get, probably for the same money. You're definitely not going to be making whoever's responsibilities you took over. You're not going to make what they make unless you're a very forceful negotiator and are able to do that. It's very much so. Yeah. So we're learning this lesson about, like I had just mentioned with COVID and everything, that you're not a machine. Like, wow, there's a life outside of just going and doing the grind every day, being a cog in the machine, right? There's something beyond that. But we're kind of taught that yes, but we have to ambitiously pursue that. We have to be the good little machine. We have to be the good little cog in the wheel, right? And so people are recognizing now, like, no, that's not what I want. That's not what I want to do. But now that we're looking at this, as I'm framing it in this Aquarian kind of way of thinking, okay, now we're seeing this kind of machine mentality and where it's affecting creativity, things that make us human. Okay, so I'm just talking about nursing before. That nursing has to do with, again, yes, there is a certain amount of tech stuff that has to be known and everything, in medicine, absolutely. But the care aspect of it, the idea of you as a person, as a human being who has feelings and needs care and might be in pain and might be suffering, it's like, yeah, we don't have time for that. And that's a problem. This is, people talk about decreases in empathy and things like that. It's like and I understand that when you're working a job like that, to a certain degree, if you have a lot of people and if there's a lot of suffering around you, you have to be able to kind of put a barrier to that if you want to function. Same thing as being a therapist. There's a certain amount there's a lot of transference that goes on in that process. It's one of the reasons I never became a therapist, because I said I just can't take on everybody's stuff like that in that way. It's just not something that I can do. So, because I just feel like I have I do have a lot of empathy for people, and so therefore it's like I find that you have to create some kind of a boundary there, because otherwise you'll be a mess all the time if you're just a sponge for everybody's feelings. But that said, that doesn't mean you should have no feelings and treat everybody like you're working on a car. That's kind of the thing. When you have a doctor like that who works on, even if they are a technically accurate doctor, even if they're very technically skilled, then they're technically skilled, but they're treating you like you have feelings. Maybe they're giving you a diagnosis you're scared about or something, and they're just like, yeah, well, whatever. Like they literally can just write you off and say, yeah, well, this is what happens. Like, whatever, get over it. That doesn't show that doesn't appeal to our empathy, and it traumatizes us further, because we feel like we're not being treated for the feelings. And this is an example of that. When I talk about that feminine disenfranchisement of the emotion, this is one form that it takes. So what other forms does it take? Okay, well, the other place that we want to look at where we sort of are uniquely human is in the arts. Okay, so if we think about the writer's strike that happened over the summer this past year, what was one of the big negotiating things that they were dealing with? They were dealing with the fact that basically these studios and so forth wanted to take an AI image of an actor, okay, and basically say, okay, we're not going to pay that actor. We're just going to use their AI image and not use them. We're just going to replace them with the image. Which is really interesting when we think about the way in which we relate to people who are celebrities in that fashion as people who are, as there is an image already, you're already projecting an image onto that person. So this is like them literally turning that person into an image. And there was pushback against that. It's like, no, you're taking the person and their art out of the situation. Okay, you're making it so you think that everything can just be kind of manipulated through these technologies to create shows, and that you don't actually need actual people or actors or these kind. You think you can just AI generate all of this stuff. Okay. The other piece of it, I think that I had been thinking about was the way in which this affects writing. Okay, you do hear about AI-generated books and how awful they are, because AI, as much as it's learned, it can't write an academic book for you. I remember back in the 90s, they would have the random paper generators and stuff, which were kind of like, they were amusing because basically they just took a concept, put a bunch of stuff together and threw out something that was actually, when you read it, it was absolute nonsense, but it was hilarious, But putting that aside, it's almost like where you're doing that. You're saying, oh, okay, well, this is a topic I have to write about. Let's throw it into ChatGPT and see what comes out. And I can't tell you now, this is the kind of thing as an educator that I'm battling, is people trying to use that to do their assignments. And the thing is, I know what I've conveyed to people in my lectures, and I know what kind of response I'm expecting. So if I tell them, they need to tell me what's going on. I tell them, you don't get credit unless you tell me what's going on in the lecture. And no, it's not because I'm omnipotent and know everything about the subject, but I need to know you're not Googling it. Well, Googling it's one problem. But I also need to know that you're not just, and I have a ChatGPT account. I have an OpenAI account. I will go and I will put my questions in there, and I will phrase them in slightly different, and I will see what kind of results I get. And if that looks suspiciously like the answer that I've gotten from a student, I'm like, do it over. This is AI. I want your answer. I said, I don't want ChatGPT's answer. ChatGPT's answer isn't right. They haven't taken my course. They haven't listened to my lectures. Now, maybe one day they will listen to my lecture and they'll have a response. But the thing is, this is all in the wake of students who have been, we've been told in the primary education or K to 12, however, that wherever you're from, like whatever that your educational system is up until about the age of 16 or 18 or whatever it is in your country, that primary and secondary education is now become, in a lot of places, very, very high tech, okay? Where kids might have laptops, or they might have Chromebooks, or they might have iPads. There's this kind of technology, and the classrooms that are, again, considered to be the most, who consider to be giving the best education, are the ones that have all of these tools. And the thing is, for this increase in tools that we're seeing, we're not only an increase in tools, but this increase in standardized testing, and how much, how well do you answer, how well do you respond to, questions on a test where probably very little actual writing is involved. There may be some, but it's not really. There might be a sentence that's done here and there, a phrase, but it's all done according to, where you have a situation where everything's being taught to a test, into a standardized test. One where the number that you get on that is going to define who you are. And now we've always had standardized tests. I mean, when I grew up, we had the Iowa tests, we had the California tests, and then basic skills and things like that. In fact, I was just looking something under my bed the other day, and for some reason I have my Iowa test scores from 1978. I don't know why, when I was in first grade. So it's kind of weird. But no surprise, I had 99th percentile in reading. But anyway, the idea is that there's always been standardized tests around, and there's this push towards standardization, push towards like a certain threshold or standard that you have to meet. And to a certain degree, when we're talking about certain skills, you have to have a threshold. You have to be able to say, well, what defines somebody who has succeeded or who understands something versus somebody who doesn't. But a lot of times, this focus on the tools, okay, this focus on the technology, this focus on testing to the point where teachers, first of all, they're expected to do things at a very accelerated rate, a rate that I think is this is my personal opinion, but I feel it's outside of what our actual developmental psych scale is. When I see, when I remember I used to catalog stuff for our education department when I worked at FDU, I would see these textbooks and stuff for kindergartners. I'm like, well, when I was in kindergarten, like, you learned how to tie your shoes. It wasn't, it's now it's like a big thing. And there's a certain amount of reading comprehension that's that may be expected. There's a certain amount of there's social studies, there's science, there's stuff that's going on for kindergartners. And I'm like, these are kids who should really be playing right now. They shouldn't be, they should still be about play working its way into learning skills. But it's not, it's like there's this push for students to learn a whole lot in a certain abbreviated period of time. So if you're a classroom teacher, then you are somebody who's in the position of having to try to fit all of this in. Plus, they have a lot of technical admin too, because at least in New Jersey, I know, they have to assign certain number tasks to everything to say, well, yes, this is the lesson I'm giving to my students, and it meets state education requirement, 1.5B, whatever. And it's ridiculous because you can't even give kids like a day of play to do something, because it's like, well, what standard does that meet? You have to, and these all have to go, again, the technology, these all have to go in. They're going to these certain course platforms, and it has to be, reported to the upper administration of the school, and everybody has to be checking on what you're doing, and, because somehow the idea is that this equalizes things or makes it better or lets people identify learning disabilities and things in that. Something, again, that I feel is over-applied. I do know that yes, and I understand that there's all kinds of things we didn't talk about in the 70s and 80s. Certain people on what we think of as the autism spectrum, things that we didn't really deal with. But that said, I have dealt with a lot of students who have told me that they grew up being told, oh yeah, they had this label or that label for what their disability was. And in working with that student, I have to tell them, you don't have any disabilities. I mean, I hate to contradict your doctor and the supposed psych people, but you don't have any disabilities. You just might take a little longer to read something, or maybe, even if you need a little longer to think about something for a test. That doesn't mean you're disabled. It just means you're taking more time with it. You're not disabled. And they let people believe that, that they can't do something in a lot of cases. Obviously where people need help, it's great that they can get it. But at the same time, I feel like there's a lot of cases where people are being categorized because they're just somehow not, they sort of were developmentally trying to push kids past something and then saying, oh, well, that kid's slow. Well, no, the kid's not slow. You're pushing them too fast. And there is such a focus on the tech and the tech tools, and a lot of that doing things for you so that you don't actually learn stuff, You don't, the way that maths are taught and things like that. I don't know how many kids are still learning multiplication tables and stuff. Now, again, I could be wrong about that. People might say to me, no, this is still going on. Maybe it is. But it seems to me that there's a lot of reliance on machines. They don't even teach handwriting anymore in a lot of places. They don't teach cursive. And the thing is, and I have many students, like when I would have essay finals that were in person, they'll write a sentence and they're just doing this. Like, oh my God, you expect me to write this? Yeah, because neurologically, that's how you remember stuff, is by writing it down. It's not typing it all in. I'm guilty of that now too. I like to type a lot of stuff, but you still have to, there's still a connection, a function that goes on there from that process. And a lot of that is lost. So you have this K-12 education system where everybody's kind of being forced to learn as much as they can in a short period of time. They don't retain a lot of it. And things that actually take time, like language arts skills, research skills, okay? And talk to any librarian, research skills. It's like, oh my God, they're non-existent. People think Google is just, even administrators, oh, Google's replaced all that. No, it hasn't. And work in the sciences, yeah, go write your scientific paper based on Google. Good luck with that. It's not how, there's no, okay, for all the technology and for all of the assessments and all the numbers, nobody's actually learning stuff. I get people who come to university who have come from very good schools with very high tech and they don't know how, I don't know how to write papers. I don't know how to, you ask them to critically think about something and they're like, well, what's on the test? Like, why do I have to think about it? Okay. So this is a problem. And again, it's not that you don't have people who are potentially creative and so forth, but you're not seeing those kinds of skills developed because the the technology has become more important than the substance behind it. Okay. Now, Photoshop. There's another example about, Photoshop actually versus AI generated images. Okay, because now you can have that. You can go to an AI art thing and you can put some words in. I've done it. I think I did it for one of my dark feminine things. I'll be like, okay, give me some images for dark feminine. Like, you can get it to auto generate stuff. And yeah, okay, it's kind of cool to play around with, but is that a replacement for art that is done by somebody as a result of a creative process that may be expressing something that is, art should be expressing something in a lot of times that is either very meaningful to us personally or to the collective culture. And it would probably end up being both. Because if we express ourselves artistically to try to convey something that maybe not always easily expressed in prose, then we need to be able to do that. You don't want to have a machine doing that for you. Okay? That's something you want to do on your own. Photoshop, I don't know if I'm always necessarily so hard on Photoshop, because you can actually take an original piece of art and play with it in Photoshop and do something cool with it. I don't, so it's really, and it's a very complicated tool. So I don't necessarily view that as like I plugged a few words into an AI thing and generated something. And again, it's not saying that the AI generated stuff is bad, but if people are kind of relying on this as a replacement for what humans are doing with it, what does that say about this mythology of the machine and how far we're going with it in terms of those things that specifically make us human? Okay, music's another example. I think I've mentioned before. One of the channels I watch is Wings of Pegasus, and Phil Henley on that channel, he talks about this a lot. Probably, I sort of feel like maybe more than he wants to, but he talks a lot about things being pitch corrected. In fact, I think he's got a petition on change.org about things being labeled as, if a producer has used pitch correction, that they need to identify that, when you buy like a live album, for instance, if it's been pitch corrected, you're not hearing the original vocal. Like, his point about that is that, when you start because what it does is it pulls everything to a standard. You've got this 440 hertz standard, which is like standard piano tuning. And what happens is you have a vocalist who sings, and then what they do is the producer's looking at it on the computer, they're basically dragging the vocal to the precise line, so that it's pitch perfect. The problem is, to be human is not to be pitch perfect. To be human, to have any emotion, and he demonstrates quite frequently on his channel that when you look at something that's pitch corrected versus that person's original vocal, the original vocal is probably full of emotion, it's full of feeling. And these are people who can sing. It's not like you're correcting it because they can't sing. They're taking it and they're pulling it because they're going to make it better. And frequently these people are not singers, and they're just looking at a voice on a computer screen and saying, oh, well, this is the number it's supposed to match, so I'm going to match it to that number. And in doing so, they actually change the artistic output. And when you listen to it, I've listened to enough of the stuff on his channel that I'm like, you can hear the difference after a while. It doesn't sound like you're listening to a human being. And you can't, it becomes a little bit less relatable because you can't, there's the humanness is gone in it. I mean, music is something that is supposed to move us, right? It's supposed to make us feel a certain way. And that's being taken out of it. It's in the interest of saying, well, no, this is what the perfect human voice should sound like. Because, so you can get a machine to do that. We look at these. So again, it's not, I don't want to demonize, I'm not going to be one of those people who demonizes AI and say every use of it is bad. But we have to be careful, because I'm seeing this, okay, so these are all different examples of how I'm seeing AI being used in creative writing, AI being used in art, AI being used in music, AI being used in writing critical thinking papers, academic papers, where maybe you are, looking at evidence, but you are also trying to think your way through a problem in a way that is sensible, that is maybe, even if everything that you have in there isn't original, at least you are you are working your way through a process, and maybe you are coming at an original thought. If you're going to come to things that are new, creative, and future looking, as we talk about with Aquarian energy, right? Then this is a chance for us. As I've said, AI should be something that we use, for certain types of tasks. People use AI assistants for all kinds of stuff. I mean, I don't always like the way it's used, but you understand why people might choose to use it, like AI personal assistants and things like that, to schedule appointments and to do things like that. I understand that. And I understand people being interested in what AI can do in these fields. Like, it's interesting, but it's not a replacement. It's more a case, it's not where you want to take a step back and say, okay, I don't need to be creative anymore because AI will do it for me. Because you are still part of what you have to contribute. And that's another thing. A lot of times I think we feel that anything we contribute artistically or creatively somehow is not of value unless we're making money off of it. That somehow it's not of value. That you... something people will say, like, if I talk to people about writing something or creating a piece of art, they're like, oh yeah, but I could never do anything with this. Well, so what? It doesn't matter. This is you being able to, this is another way of you interacting with the world. When you let AI do it all for you, this is another way you alienate yourself from the world. And that's the thing you have to watch out for. AI doesn't have to be a bad thing, but if it's a tool you're going to use, need to be, I think, what this Pluto in Aquarius, it's like you want to think about how you're using it. Because if you're going to let it, because if it's just too hard, if life is too complicated and too busy for you to spend any time thinking about anything or creating anything, then I think we have a different kind of a problem here. And so I think where I kind of want to get back to with that is I'm thinking about the story I had talked about maybe last week, and it's interesting, of Apollo and Marsyas, because I did talk a little bit about Apollo in one of my live streams in the last couple of weeks, and it was funny because as I was preparing that podcast, or maybe just right after I did it, I was grading myth papers. I had an assignment on the 12 Olympians for my, this is basic mythology, so they're learning Greek and Roman mythology. We started with creation myths. Now we're talking about the cult of the 12, right? And this was the question was not specifically about any of the specific Olympian gods that I asked them in their question that their assignment that they have to hand in to me. But one of my students, who I know does not watch this, they don't watch this. Okay, at least as far as I know, because it wasn't brought up that way. Happened to talk about certain gods and brought up both the Apollo and Daphne and the Apollo and Marsyas myth. She brought up both of those in her paper and was talking about Apollo, particularly the Apollo and Daphne thing, in a way of which, the laurels are somehow supposed to meant to honor Daphne. We had that. I'm like, yeah, I don't know if that's what's really going on there, but I guess you could look at it that way. But it was funny. She mentioned it, and then I was talking with another friend who somehow it came up with her as well. Like, it was like three people in one day mentioned after I talked about it here, they brought it up in these other contexts, and I was kind of like, okay, I feel like this is something I need to kind of circle back around and think about some more. And that particular story, and I'll just repeat it for you, was that the god Apollo, of course, he's a god of poetry and music, among other things, prophecy, and he's the sun god, he's god of civilization and all that kind of stuff. And so he's a very highly civilized god. Nietzsche associates him with order and that kind of thing. And he plays the lyre, okay, which is a stringed instrument. And he was challenged to a music competition by a satyr, and the satyr's name is Marsyas. So satyrs are like the god Pan. You've seen the pan flutes, and that's kind of music that's the music of the forest. That's the music that the satyrs make. So there becomes a contest between Apollo and the satyr, musical contest, where they both play, and then there are judges who decide, who the winner is, who played better music. And of course, Apollo wins almost unanimously. King Midas is the only one who votes for Marsyas, which I've said is somewhat interesting, given Marsyas, King Midas and his connection to gold, and there's a little Chtonic subtext there with King Midas, but I'm not going to digress into that here. What's interesting is that when Marsyas loses the contest, Apollo has him flayed alive. He basically has him, hangs his skin up, like a kind of serial killer fashion in a way. And they said the whole forest mourned the death of Marsyas. Okay, now when we look at this story, okay, one of the associations that we can see here automatically, if we're looking at this sort of allegorically, is that Apollo, now he's this god of civilization and order, and what is proper, what is learned, what is technical, right? As somebody who studied poetry at the undergraduate and graduate level, there's those of you who have done that know that people tell you there is a right way to look at poetry. If you interpret it, even probably if you're in high school and so forth, if you don't interpret that poem in the way that the experts tell you you're supposed to interpret that poem, well, you're wrong. That's not what the poem means. It's what they say it means, right? Similarly, with music, it's sort of like, okay, who are the ones with the expertise? I mean, obviously there's people who maybe, people who have music training, people who are very technically proficient in music. And those people make great music. They can do wonderful things. But there's also a side to that is more raw, okay? That is more spontaneous, more natural. It doesn't necessarily follow that orderliness that you have with the precise and correct way that things are supposed to be. So like when I think about the pitch correction thing, I'm thinking like, that's supposed to be the key, the standard pitch that everybody is supposed to reach. That's supposed to be the perfect one. That's the right one. Okay. Now I would not suggest that the kind of music one would think of as Apollonian necessarily it probably does have a lot of emotion in it. But the way that we've taken technology and kind of layered it on top of that is that now it's become a very highly, like everything else, it's more about the technology and not about the actual content. And, when you think of the image of, Apollo flaying Marsyas, it's kind of like, okay, no, we are going to, we're going to destroy, the god of light destroys anything that is kind of raw and rough and maybe considered to be cruder. But for those of us who certainly have more pagan leanings, I guess, we certainly feel that that music of the forest is not something to be discarded and thrown away. It actually has an appeal in and of itself. There were a lot of stories actually written about that in the 19th century, about the way in which that music, of course, that music was always seen as a threat, right? It was the idea you could be lured into the forest by this haunting, beautiful music of the Fae or of the satyrs of the, and then there was something actually kind of inherently sexual about that kind of music too, right? Whereas we have Apollo, who really had trouble scoring with anybody. So, I mean, it kind of makes you think about, talking about this with respect to the dark feminine, which is my sort of, I guess, theme that I've had in this podcast. To me, I almost feel like this kind of use of technology, it's another layer that's putting between us and the natural world and what's natural and what's feminine, in the sense of what comes out of emotion, what comes out of what's raw, what's instinctual, what's erotic, what's deeply felt, as opposed to what's technically correct. That we don't, what's not technically correct isn't good. It's not acceptable. It's got to be fixed. It's got to be changed. It's that view of nature that nature's imperfect and we have to correct it. This is like another layer of that, in my view, or at very least, we need to watch. That's the shadow point there. That's the Pluto point, right? That's the thing you want to watch out for. That in developing these new technologies, like any technology, make sure you are not. It's fine to have assistance. It's fine to have technological help. It's fine to have tools. do you want it to replace you, what you have to contribute, and who you are? I mean, are you really going to become the number that you end up being in the educational system? I'm very resistant to dealing with that even when I grade. The day that they all tell me that I must follow a strict rubric is the day that I quit. I won't do it. People say, well, students need to know exactly. I'm like, no, I have been teaching this long enough. I can tell you if this is an A paper, a C paper, or if I'm failing this person. I can tell you right off the bat. How much work has gone into this, and I know, so I don't, and the thing is that is not something that you can quantify down to a decimal point, okay? Especially when you're talking about the humanities or the arts. There are things that are supposedly imperfect that are part of what makes us living beings and who we are, and I think we need to stop striving for perfection and just start focusing on what does it mean to be authentically who we are. I know, and the word authenticity gets thrown around a lot too. And I'm thinking about that, but really, it's a matter of, because part of what ends up being in shadow, part of what we're ashamed at is, oh, I'm expressing it, but I'm not good at that. It's like, okay, well, no, maybe you are, maybe you're not from some kind of some kind of a standard, but it doesn't mean that, at least for yourself or for that it does not mean that you should not express yourself in these ways. Expression is fine. You don't have to monetize it. You don't have to be, listed among the top or the great or whatever. Who cares? I mean, it's a matter of any of this stuff. Okay, I think I'll just kind of end with what Alan Watts had said. He had talked about, when he was talking about music in particular, he said, the point of playing music is not to get to you're not going as fast as you can to get to the end of the piece. The idea, or if you're dancing, the point of a dance is not to rush your way to get to the end of the dance. The point of it is to be in the moment of what it is. And when we're too busy, too distracted, and too overwhelmed, and can't be bothered being in the moment of something, then it's like, well, then where are we exactly? What exactly are you doing? Where are you? Are you in a little bubble somewhere? Are you alienated from everything around you? Because, I know, we all like to kind of hole up and escape from time to time, but for how long can you do that? You can't. There's a certain periods of time where we can escape and we can hide away from things, and I'm as guilty of that as anybody. I can just disappear and not leave these four walls for period of times, and just not want to. We kind of want to shut the world out. Sometimes it's not a bad thing to do, but generally speaking, if you're going to live your whole life, just completely offloading all of your humanity to something else, to a machine or to a or to a program or to something, and giving that up basically, and letting that be what our culture is going to be going forward. I would think very carefully about that, because I feel like we are just slowly more and more giving up, who and what we are and what makes us. If there is something that makes us unique as a species, we're basically throwing that all away. And if technology is supposed to make things easier for us, why then easier to do what? Easier to, if it's about enjoying life or about embracing life, then why are we offloading all of those things that allow us to connect to life experience? I think there needs to be some thought about, I think that's going to be that's Pluto and Aquarius thought. Like, what, again, regardless, people who may have joined late, regardless of whether you believe in astrology or not, I mean, that's kind of the framing. If we're looking at what's the dark side of future thinking and new technology, yeah, the question is, how much of your humanity are you giving up in the middle of that? And, we already had religion try to tell us that spirit's better than soul. Now it's almost like technology somehow is better than our soul also. And I would dispute that personally. So anyway, we are at a little over an hour. I want to thank you guys so much for joining. This will be available as a recording here. And as I've said, tomorrow I'm going to upload this on YouTube. There is now a Chthonia IG live streams channel on Chthonia Podcast on, same as here on Instagram. It's at Chthonia Podcast on YouTube. as well if you want to go back and check it out, if you want to catch the whole thing, if you didn't see the whole thing, or if you just want to review it or any of the last 4 that I did. They will be there from now on. Thank you guys, and Politicity, yes. Literally, my thoughts are your thoughts. Yes, yeah. And actually, you're reminding me, we probably have to do a Patreon live stream at some point, because it would be cool to have people on to talk about this kind of stuff. Thank you, everybody, for listening today, and I hope this was enlightening. I'd love to hear your comments, and I'll see you next week.